All right. Hey, welcome, Matt.
Yeah, good morning, Rex. Good to talk to you.
Yeah. Thanks for joining me as we discuss dental practice valuations. Just as a reminder to folks, my name's Rex Plamann. I'm a partner at DDSmatch covering Greater Chicago, Northern Illinois. I thought maybe we'd timestamp this for those that'll be tuning in sometime down the road. It is May 29th, Friday, May 29th, 2020. We're coming out of this COVID crisis and the corresponding economic shutdown, or at least I pray that we are. And we're going to talk about dental practice valuations today because I think that there's some questions with the terminology for folks that might be facing a practice transition, either on the acquisition side or on the seller side, as well as, hey, let's talk a little bit about what COVID could do to valuations today and moving forward. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Matt Howard, who is the Senior Manager in the Valuation and Strategy Group at Blue Company, our partners down in Indianapolis, Indiana. Matt, welcome. Thanks for joining, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Blue Company.
Yeah, so again, Matt Howard with Blue Company. Blue Company is a top 60 CPA firm. We have 15 offices here in the Midwest, but really have a very significant healthcare presence. And so we have a very robust healthcare group that services hospital systems all the way down to the smaller side of healthcare, and that's where I spend all of my time. I probably participate in a good 200 to 300 dental valuations or transactions from a business valuation perspective, buyer representative perspective. But yeah, we do a lot of in the dental transaction world. So that's where I spend all of my time. So that's a little bit about me and Blue.
Nice. I appreciate that, Matt. You've been with them about 10 years now or so?
That's correct. Yeah. About 10 years now.
Awesome. So a lot of practice owners are wondering, as we're coming out of this COVID crisis, this disruption, what's your perspective on valuing dental practices coming out of this and moving forward?
Yeah, great question. A question we're getting across the board from people contemplating selling is, at the end of the day, timing is everything. And unfortunately, we're in an interesting timing problem for some dentists that do want to sell their practices currently. And especially if they have health concerns and returning to practice, or if they were just scheduled to transact their practice at this time. Our current thought process is obviously we don't have all the answers today. We're sitting at a time when a lot of practices are returning to work and figuring out what the new ebb and flow of their practice is from a production perspective, from a PPE perspective, from how long does it take me to get a patient through the chair and through the whole, practice ecosystem. So really formulating and understanding all of those things and how they're going to impact the economics of the practice will be important in getting a really good answer. But today what we're doing in our business valuations is this: we don't really have great 2020 data yet. And obviously most practices were shut down for at least a month or two. Some practices did some emergency procedures during that time, some didn't. What we're currently doing is this: we are taking 2019 financials and at least getting a good starting place in understanding the value of a practice. And then as we get more data on 2020, I think we'll be able to adjust those valuations. We started out at a good place in understanding where was the practice as it sat in 2019. And then as we understand how it's economically affected the practice's cash flow, margins, efficiencies, I think we'll be able to, adjust those 2019 valuations to the appropriate point as it sits today. So that's currently what we're doing. Obviously, as we get more 2020 data, we'll start utilizing that more, but that's currently what we're doing.
Okay, yeah. So is COVID maybe potentially like a blip on the radar, an asterisk sort of in the timeline of these businesses?
So obviously when you look to buy a practice, right, you're going to have ups and downs over a 30-year, 40-year career, hopefully, in owning that practice, right? So obviously, if you're buying in during a time where there's uncertainty in how is the world going to operate, there is going to be a discount. I mean, it certainly has impacted valuations. If you're looking to transact in the next 6 months, it's hard to really compute all of the effects that it's going to have in your practice, which does affect a buyer's certainty on what are they buying. Are they buying a practice that, you know, did $1 million in 2019, but now can only do 850? Again, we don't know. We can't measure the changes yet, and I think that's where you know, the months to come are going to be very important to a seller and to a buyer. A seller, their best business case they can make to a buyer is, how closely can I resemble pre-COVID results? Understanding that there are barriers along the way in order to do that, from, you know, increased PPE costs to, you know, how long does it take to get a patient through the door, and, you know, how do I keep my staff safe, and what if there is a COVID disruption even inside of my own practice? How do I handle that? You know, all those questions will be solved. I mean, I'm a big believer in human history, and we have managed to make it this far, and I don't think we're going to end here. I think we're going to adapt. We're going to find a way forward that is prudent, that keeps our patients safe, that keeps our staff safe. So it might affect our efficiencies. Understanding what is the economic changes to the practice on a go-forward basis is going to be important. But understanding that at some point in the future, we will find a new rhythm, and we will find a new normal. So, you know, I get a lot of calls from buyers right now that are looking for fire sales. I don't think that's what this is. All practices have been affected by this. Yes, it's going to change valuation, but it's not made practices suddenly worthless, if you follow what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure.
What are you hearing from buyers, Rex?
Well, yeah, people are looking for a deal. You're starting to hear that from folks that are emerging out of this as first-time buyers, and they think it's just going to be sort of a fire sale. And I don't believe that to be the case, as long as the patients come back to the practice. And, you know, certainly we're going to have to get creative with these opportunities for the buyers that are out there looking at our sellers' practices. But, you know, coming into the COVID crisis, the buyer group was really healthy between the groups, the DSOs, the private buyers, with a good stable of sellers out there. And you know, as this COVID crisis came upon us and the fog set in, you know, new buyers did erupt out of this. And generally speaking, they were folks that were associates in practices, wondering what their future is going to look like as an associate if other disruptions like this occur again. So understandably, they want to have more control of their lives and their practicing careers, and they want to be an owner. So they're not the last person called back, which I think many associates are finding today. You know, the front desk person's going back, certainly the owner's going back into the practice, hygiene's getting back up to speed, assistants are needed back, and then I think the last person getting called is that associate. And that's not a great feeling. So it's neat to see that these buyers are stepping up, these new buyers are stepping up, wanting to own a practice. And as this was all going on, you know, we all talk about it on our calls weekly at DDSmatch. We've got like 28 partners now covering 39 states. And we're talking how many DSOs have put the brakes on acquisitions, and for good reason. You know, they've got a lot of practices under management, and they need to take care of that business, those employees, those patients, before they get back into acquisition mode. And, you know, another thing that was controlling our activity during this COVID crisis was the lenders. You know, the lenders had been backing off, understandably, not wanting to fund a business that's not open. So the buyers are all out there, and people are just kind of waiting for the smoke to clear a little bit, see operations get back to normal. We are closing transactions right now, though. So that's great to see. And we think, you know, it's only going to continue on from there with the new buyers out there, DSOs getting back into play. So that's what I'm seeing. How about yourself, Matt?
Yeah, I think you hit out of the park. I think that's exactly what we've been seeing is, first of all, buyers do have a lot more time on their hands currently, or at least over the last month they have. And some of them are returning to practice. Some of them are returning to their jobs. Some are evaluating their careers. And again, my biggest advice to buyers as I try to guide them through the process is understand that it is very important to you to have the buy-in of the person that the dentist that you're buying the practice from. They need to be on your side, right? And I think that, trying to negotiate a fire sale is a great way to get them off of your team, right? And so just understand that there's an emotional side to the legacy that the seller has built, and just try to, if two parties are negotiating in good faith, right, we will come at a fair deal. So I think that buyers need to enter negotiations in good faith and understand that they are buying a 30-year practice that is currently being affected by the state of COVID. But is that really going to impact practices for the next 30 years? I don't know. I'm not saying that I know that. I'm just saying that I don't think that it is a fire sale environment. It is, these practices are still have great relationships with their patients. These patients still need dental care. Yes, there may be a few that have lost their insurance or don't have the means to pay for maybe some of the services that they used to get. Understanding that, and yes, it does impact valuation, but is it worth nothing? That doesn't seem reasonable.
Yeah, I hear you. I agree. And as we go into our conversations with sellers, they're kind of wondering what their practice is worth, or they sometimes have a number in their head, Matt. And so much of it really comes down to fair market value. How would you describe that term, fair market value, for our owners?
In layman's terms, I think my job is not always a glamorous one. I am seeking to tick off both parties equally. I say that in a joking manner, but that's what fair market value is. It's that friction point, right? Where the seller is like, man, I could get a little bit more out of this practice, and a buyer's like, I could get a little bit better of a deal. And that friction, I think, is kind of a nice layman's term of defining fair market value. Fair market value is basically saying, what is any given buyer, any given seller, with all the relevant facts known, what would they arrive at in an open market transaction? What is the market demanding for my practice today? And again, the economics are very important to developing fair market value, and that's why I was talking about all the the unknowns that we don't know today from the economic impact on these practices. But that is the economics drive most of our business valuations. We use a cash flow income approach that does take a look at the economics of the practice, and yeah, so that's basically where we're at today.
Sure. Yeah, we often have conversations and need to set expectations with what the market will bear, and we certainly don't want to put a buyer out of business after the acquisition of our seller's practice. And at the same time, right, that's their baby, our seller's baby. They've owned that practice for 35, 40 years maybe, and it's rewarded them nicely over time. And if the cash flow's right and all those metrics come into the right places for everybody, it should be a win-win scenario for both parties at the end of the day.
Right. And then part of our evaluation process is doing exactly that, is a gut check at the end of the process to make sure, does this make sense? Not only does this reward the seller well for the practice that they've built over many years, but does it also protect their legacy? Does it protect the buyer? And at least from a proof of concept perspective, at the end, we do a gut check to say, does this transaction price the buyer a return on their investment? As in, does it make sense for them post-transaction? Because if they fail, it does not help anybody in the deal. So that's where, the third party that I come in into, any evaluation that you bring to me, Rex, and I try to come in and give that fair market value opinion. I don't have any skin in the game. I get paid exactly the same amount for every business valuation that we do, and just help both parties have a fair starting place for good faith negotiations that make the deal feel less like a used car transaction and more like a we could be friends after this, associate, and we don't hate each other because we haven't negotiated for 6 months and nickel and dime each other until at the end, and we're just ready to throw our hands up and say, good riddance.
No doubt, no doubt. And on another front, you know, you've got the groups out there, Matt, and the DSOs, and they like to measure acquisitions a little bit differently than those private transactions that we host a lot. Yeah. And they use that term EBITDA. And how would you briefly explain their use of EBITDA in looking and evaluating practices for purchase?
Yeah, so earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. It's basically, we got to put ourselves in the shoes of a corporate or a private equity group for a second, and they're looking at it from a return on investment perspective. A buyer in the private sale is looking for, what is my cash flow? What am I going to be able to bring home at the end of each year from a cash flow perspective that I can sustain my life outside of the practice, right? So they're looking at it from a cash flow perspective. The corporate buyer is looking at it from an investment and return on their investment perspective. So a couple of things to understand in a DSO type transaction is a lot of times they will offer more than a private buyer does. A lot of that has to do with the fact that some of that's going to be held out in a contingency type holdback, where you're going to have to basically prove out and sustain operations or grow operations in order to get access to, let's say, 25 or 50% of the sales price. So there is some ongoing contingencies involved. But they're looking at EBITDA, and EBITDA to them is not so much how much am I going to make per year of owning this practice, but what am I going to make eventually when I roll up this practice and maybe 20 or 30 or 50 other practices, and sell them as a larger bundle to even a bigger DSO or private equity group. So they're looking at it fairly differently than a private buyer would.
Yeah, makes sense. It's just kind of a different term, and people have different definitions of it for sure. When folks are deciding to bring their practice to the market, etc., you know, I want to talk a little bit before we close out, Matt, about, you know, what's kind of our outlook for the industry, for the mergers and acquisitions in dentistry. You know, 2020, as we rolled into January 2020, February 2020, I mean, the economy was killing it, right? I mean, unemployment was at some of the lowest levels of all time, people are saying. Dentists, you know, 0% unemployment across the board. And then the COVID hits, right? Well, I'd like to believe, and I think we're all talking on the same page at DDSmatch across the country, you know, as practices get through their challenges and get back up to speed and normal operations come back into play through hygiene and operative, and patients are coming back as scheduled and not canceling and whatnot. I mean, certainly there will be challenges that every practice will have, and some will be unique to others, but we feel like coming into, you know, the third and fourth quarter of 2020, that, you know, it's going to be a very robust market with both buyers and sellers able to really get to their goals and plans and dreams, and either getting out of, you know, ownership or moving into ownership. Lenders will certainly have their feet under them. They'll get past this PPP burden that they have, and everything will be kind of normal. There might be more of an influx of practices for sale, right? Because people just say, I've had it. But that's a good thing, because I think there will be enough bodies on the other side to meet that demand. Like you stated before, I don't think it's going to be a fire sale environment, because when the patient starts showing up, goodwill is what goodwill is, and the cash flow is what it is, and it needs to be respected. And at the end of the day, I think we're going to have a strong dental economy that we've always had, that recovers well through recessions of all different types, like this unique one with COVID. And I don't know, I just think it's going to be good times. It's going to be good times. What are your thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, if we were in the restaurant business, I would say, yes, this is not going to be as much of a fun. Right. No, at the end of the day, we have about 300 dental clients that we do the traditional bookkeeping and accounting for. A lot of them are back to work today, and a lot of them have seen their schedules filled and concerned about hygiene recall for years to come during this time, because we're going to have this weird, June recall issue for a while. But at the end of the day, I am too bullish on the dental world in that dentistry is a staple of our health, and it's not going away. Yes, insurances, patients' insurances may have shifted or changed, or the economics, or maybe there's going to be a little bit more scrutiny to treatment plans that are presented to patients. But at the end of the day, people do value their teeth, and the practices have done a great job taking good care of them. As long as they get back to that, and we don't have a resurgence of COVID and maybe another shutdown next year, as long as none of that comes back into play, I think we'll be recovering very well. And I too am optimistic for our dental clients, and a lot of them are already getting back to work and finding themselves at 85% of historical numbers, which is great, especially as we figure out what are the new processes and procedures around practicing dentistry.
Yeah, I hear you there. And I talked to one of my sellers the other day. He's got a general practice, and he was coming back into the office, getting operations going. And right away, he was boasting that he's going to have a record month, that there's tons of pent-up demand, and even hygiene was coming around nicely. So you have that side of it. And then I was with another seller yesterday that's just coming to market with his practices with DDSmatch, and he had a couple patients that were coming in the next 45 minutes or so, and they both called to cancel. So everybody's going to have unique challenges. Nobody's safe from the effects of this thing, but at the end of the day, dentistry has been strong for a long, long time, and it will be respected and strong and take care of a lot of people coming out of this. Matt, I want to thank you for joining in. I really appreciate your expertise. Blue Company, you guys have been awesome partners for us at DDSmatch. Keep doing what you do. I want to thank everybody that's tuning in whenever you are tuning in to learn a little bit about practice valuations. We appreciate your time. Matt and I will leave our information up here. Really, if you have any questions about these topics, or you'd like to learn a little bit more about our services that we provide to the dental industry, Matt at Blue Company and myself and all the folks at DDSmatch, we're here for you. It all just starts with a simple conversation. And thank you so much for tuning in. We're calling these studios here over in Elmhurst, Illinois, 613 Studios. So 613 Studios is wrapping right now. Thanks so much for tuning in.